Desperate criminals, hiding in plain sight, slowly closed in on a royal guard as the crowd continued to enjoy their day. With a sudden move, one of the criminals reached into his coat and pulled out a gun, sending shockwaves through the crowd. In that split second, everything changed. The royal guard, however, wasn't about to back down. What happened next stunned everyone in the vicinity. But before we dive into the intense confrontation, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The royal guard named Mitchell stood motionless, as he had every day, his scarlet uniform gleaming in the afternoon sun. His job was simple in its duty but complex in its demands: stand, watch, protect. The palace was bustling with tourists, their laughter and chatter echoing through the courtyard, but Mitchell's focus never wavered. His eyes scanned the crowd, always alert. But today, something was off. A group of criminals, hidden in plain sight, moved through the crowd. They walked too deliberately, their eyes scanning the area as if they were looking for something, someone. They tried to blend in with the rest of the tourists, but their every movement screamed trouble. Mitchell noticed the way they avoided eye contact, the tension in their shoulders. They weren't here to admire the palace, they were here for something else. His instincts kicked in. He'd seen this before, the way danger didn't always announce itself, but slipped in quietly, hiding behind the normal. Mitchell's gaze tightened as he followed their every move, knowing that whatever came next, he had to be ready. Mitchell stood still, but his mind was racing. The criminals were getting closer, moving with more purpose now. The tourists around them were oblivious, snapping photos and enjoying the sights. But Mitchell knew better. The man at the front of the group was too calm, too focused. The way he kept glancing at the other tourists, the way his hands shifted slightly in his coat, it was the subtle signs of someone preparing for something. Mitchell's instincts told him to act. He shifted his stance, ready to react, but still in full control. Every inch of his training told him to wait, to stay calm. But the air was thick with tension, and something in his gut told him that this moment wouldn't play out like the others. The man in the front, wearing a sharp suit that looked too out of place for a tourist, glanced over at Mitchell. There was no fear in his eyes, just cold calculation. He moved a step closer, his pace slowing, as if he was testing the boundaries. Mitchell's gaze never left him, every muscle coiled and ready. This was no ordinary tourist. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" the man said, his voice low and calculated, not a hint of the usual curiosity in his tone. Mitchell didn't respond. He couldn't. The tension was building, and he had no idea what would happen next, but he was ready. The next move would be theirs, or his. Without warning, the main criminal's hand shot inside his coat, and in an instant, a gun was pulled out. The metallic gleam of the weapon caught the sunlight, and the crowd gasped, frozen in shock. The criminals had made their move, and it was clear now, this was no ordinary threat. Mitchell's eyes locked onto the gun, every detail registering in an instant. The criminal's hand was steady, but his grip on the weapon was far too deliberate, too controlled. Mitchell could see the cold calculation in his eyes, the way he was positioning himself for the perfect shot. It was a stark contrast to the panic rippling through the tourists. But Mitchell didn't move. His training kicked in immediately. He had seen situations like this before, danger lurking, a weapon drawn, but he had never faltered. His mind raced, calculating his options in seconds. The criminal's posture was tense but deliberate, his finger just inches from the trigger. Mitchell could see the slight tremor in his hand, a sign that the man was not as calm as he appeared. The seconds felt like hours as the standoff continued. The gun was aimed directly at Mitchell, but he didn't flinch. He kept his stance perfect, his eyes never leaving the criminals. This wasn't the first time he had been in danger, and he knew exactly how to handle it. His breath remained steady, his body still, waiting for the right moment to act. The tension between them was palpable. Every movement the criminal made was measured, and every reaction from Mitchell was calculated. The game had changed, and Mitchell knew he couldn't back down. It was a fight for control, and he was determined to come out on top. The seconds stretched long as Mitchell's eyes never left the criminal's face. The gun was still trained on him, but Mitchell had seen enough to know that now was the time to act. His mind was calm, focused. This was no longer about fear or confusion. This was about control. He knew exactly what to do. In one fluid motion, Mitchell shifted his body slightly to the side, just enough to throw off the criminal's aim. With a speed that came from years of training, he lunged forward, grabbing the barrel of the gun before the man could tighten his finger on the trigger. His gloved hands wrapped around the gun with surgical precision, twisting the wrist to force the criminal to release the weapon. The criminal's startled shout was barely heard over the swift movement of Mitchell's hands as he took control of the situation. The crowd around them gasped, some stepping back in shock, others too stunned to move. It happened so quickly, they barely had time to process what was going on. The criminal, now disarmed and completely off balance, stumbled backward, his hands raised in shock. He had expected to have the upper hand, he had expected the royal guard to be an easy target, but now, as the gun slipped from his grasp and into Mitchell's, the full weight of the situation began to hit him. His face twisted with frustration and disbelief, realizing that the professional guard before him had anticipated every move, had known exactly how to handle him from the start. Mitchell's eyes were cold and calculating, a calm focus that only came from years of experience in life-threatening situations. The gun now safely in his hand, Mitchell stepped back, keeping the criminal at arm's length. "Stay where you are," Mitchell ordered, his voice steady, unwavering. The criminal hesitated for a moment, his chest heaving with anger and confusion. He had miscalculated. What he thought was a perfect plan, drawing a weapon on a lone guard, had been countered with effortless precision. Mitchell's posture remained perfect, not a muscle twitching as he held the weapon firmly in his grip. The criminals, once so sure of themselves, now stood uncertain, realizing that their attempt had failed spectacularly. For a split second, the criminal's eyes darted around, looking for an escape route, but it was too late. The sound of approaching sirens began to fill the air. Mitchell had already pressed the button, triggering the silent alarm. Backup was on the way. The criminal's shoulders slumped as he realized that there was no way out. He was trapped, and there was no escape from the consequences of his actions. As the tourists watched, some still too afraid to move, the once panic-stricken atmosphere began to shift. People began to breathe again, slowly at first, then more confidently. The royal guard had done what he was trained to do, he had defused the situation. The criminals had been disarmed and were no longer a threat. The tension that had filled the air like a storm cloud was finally dissipating, replaced by a growing sense of calm and relief. Mitchell stood tall, his hands steady as he held the gun, his eyes never leaving the criminals. His composure was unshakable, the years of service and training keeping him grounded even in the face of danger. The crowd, which had been frozen in fear, began to move again. Some turned away, eager to put the ordeal behind them, while others exchanged glances of disbelief, still processing the moment they had just witnessed. A few moments later, two uniformed officers arrived, their heavy boots echoing on the cobblestone as they moved quickly toward the scene. The criminals were swiftly arrested, their hands bound, their heads hung in defeat. The sight of their failure was clear on their faces. They had come with a plan, but it had been met with the calm professionalism of the royal guard. What had started as a deadly confrontation was now over, without a single shot fired. Mitchell, still holding the disarmed gun in his hand, didn't relax. His eyes scanned the area, assessing the situation with the precision of someone who had done this countless times. He knew this wasn't just about disarming one criminal. This was about protecting the people around him, ensuring that every person in the crowd was safe, that no innocent bystander would be harmed. "Thank you, sir," the officer said to Mitchell, nodding in respect as they began escorting the criminals away. Mitchell gave a brief nod in return but said nothing. His job wasn't over yet. The tourists were still in a state of shock, and it was his duty to ensure they felt safe again. He turned toward the crowd, making eye contact with a few people who had been near the action. His gaze was steady, reassuring. "You're safe now," he said simply, his voice strong, offering nothing more than the calm assurance of a soldier who had done his job. The tourists, some still wide-eyed, slowly began to filter away, their excitement replaced with a newfound respect for the Royal Guard. Mitchell watched them go, his attention always alert. It wasn't just about one moment of bravery, it was about the responsibility he carried every day, standing guard over something greater than himself. As the police took the criminals away, Mitchell returned to his post. His uniform remained pristine, his posture unwavering, and his mind already turning to the next duty ahead. The guard's job was never done. The moment of danger had passed, but his commitment remained. The crowd had witnessed a quiet heroism, a display of skill and calm under pressure, and they would remember it long after they left the palace. But Mitchell didn't need thanks or recognition. He had done his job, and for him, that was enough. As Mitchell stood in the fading sunlight, his posture still perfect, his mind replayed the events of the day. What had just happened wasn't about the gun, the criminals, or even the tourists who had witnessed it all. It was about something deeper, something he'd learned over years of service. His role as a royal guard wasn't just about standing still or looking the part, it was about discipline, training, and the ability to stay calm in the face of danger. In that moment, Mitchell wasn't just guarding a palace. He was protecting something much bigger, the values, traditions, and safety of the nation. And in the face of danger, those values had to come first. It wasn't about fear or heroics. It was about doing his duty, no matter the cost. The criminals, with their guns and their threats, had come for something different. They wanted chaos, fear, and confusion. But they'd been met with calm precision. Mitchell's years of training had prepared him for this. No matter how unexpected the situation was, he knew exactly how to handle it. And that was the real strength of the Royal Guard. It wasn't in the uniform or the ceremony. It was in the resolve to stand firm when everything around you was uncertain, and in the knowledge that what you were doing was bigger than any single moment. In the heat of that confrontation, when the gun was aimed at him, Mitchell didn't think about the danger. He didn't think about the crowd or the criminals. His only thought was the job. To stay focused. To remain calm. And to protect the people who depended on him. His heroism wasn't loud or brash, it was quiet, calculated, and professional. It was in the way he never let his guard down, even when the stakes were at their highest. And that's what heroism truly is. It's not about grand gestures or explosive moments. It's about knowing your duty, carrying it out, and doing it with the highest level of professionalism, no matter the situation. It's the strength to remain composed when everything else is falling apart. The real heroes don't always make a scene, they just do what needs to be done. So, think about it, how would you react under that kind of pressure? Would you be able to stay calm, just like Mitchell? It's easy to say what we'd do, but when the situation is real, it's not so simple. It takes years of training, discipline, and unwavering resolve. What do you think about duty, bravery, and professionalism? How would you respond in a crisis like this? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to see more incredible stories of bravery and duty. Let's all reflect on what it means to serve with honor and composure, even when faced with danger. Remember, the true measure of strength is not in how loud we stand, but in how solid we stay when everything around us threatens to shake. The Royal Guard's duty is one of silent courage. And that, in itself, is a lesson we all can learn from.